Welcome back to Lost in Games Unscripted, the semi-regular series that's quickly becoming a little bit more regular on the channel. This is going to be the second video in 2 weeks, and I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. This is crazy. So last week, I put up a video talking about how I would write The Walking Dead had I been in charge of writing from the beginning to the end. It was just a high-level overview. It wasn't anything too in-depth, but you all seemed to really enjoy it. And some of you said you wanted to hear some more different things and in-depth kind of stuff. So I wanted to talk about one thing in particular today, and then a comment that was in regards to that I wanted to talk about as well, because there was one comment in particular where somebody had said basically that the scratch that I had mentioned for Duck wouldn't have gotten him infected because scratches don't cause infections. According to the show, there's plenty of instances in the show where people are getting scratched and nobody ever gets infected. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I'm going to be talking about Duck today. And what I want to do basically is expand on Duck's story and kind of go beat for beat on how I would have written Duck as a character over 4 seasons, because potentially in my rewriting, he could be there for 4 seasons. But we'll start with the scratch, because essentially one of the biggest problems that I have with zombie media in general, and specifically The Walking Dead, is that they have a tendency to write themselves into a hole and then kind of like retcon things, and they never really make the rules of the virus 100% clear. Now, there are some TV shows and movies that have had almost a supernatural virus or supernatural reason for zombies. Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, one of my favorite Scooby-Doo movies, is a perfect example of like it's a supernatural thing that's bringing these people back to life, right? And then you have things like the cordyceps virus in The Last of Us, and that kind of is a plausible explanation that can kind of make sense. But then you have The Walking Dead, where the rules don't really make a whole lot of sense. A bite can cause you to change, or does cause you to turn into a zombie. If you get bit, you're basically dead within probably a couple of days or 2 at most, if you're lucky. Everybody's infected, so you turn automatically whenever you die, if you're not shot in the head or whatever. So like the rules just don't make a ton of sense, because if it's a virus or a bacteria, a bite would imply that, or being infected by a bite would imply that it is transmitted via bodily fluids, saliva, blood, semen, that kind of stuff. And if that's the case, then they should never be able to get any zombie stuff at all on their skin or near their like eyes and ears and that kind of stuff, because they could get inside of them pretty easily. The times they cover themselves in walker guts to try to make themselves invisible to the zombies, it just doesn't make sense, right? So if a bite is going to do it, in theory, a scratch could, because you would get scratched that would open up and tear the skin, and the virus could get in that way. So if I'm rewriting it, I'm going after Robert Kirkman directly for his lack of explanation, and I'm making it a solid bite, scratch, zombie guts, all of that stuff, which coincidentally makes it a little bit more difficult when they want to cover themselves in zombie guts and walk around places. They have to find other ways to do things. And I think that can be written to be a little bit more interesting and kind of be a little bit more sneaky and that kind of thing, almost stealth-like, right? It might not be as fun from a gameplay perspective, at least not from that angle. But this is what I'm a writer. This is what I do. Okay. So, let's start talking about Duck a little bit, because we were talking about getting scratched. And in my rewrite, Duck could potentially get scratched on the tractor. If you, as the player character, as Lee, go and save Sean, Duck gets scratched, but it's not really noticed until later at the motel, and he kind of like basically dies in his mother's arms, but she doesn't realize it. He comes back as a zombie and bites her, and then we fade to black and go off, and that's how we get into episodes 2, 3, 4, and all that. In this scenario, we're going to say that Lee saved Duck. So Lee goes over and he helps Kenny to get Duck off the back of the tractor. Sean gets killed. It's a whole mess. They get kicked off the farm. They wind up going to Macon. In Macon, as they are running up to the pharmacy, Katja gets bit. And they bring her and Duck into the pharmacy with them, but she's bit. It's a hidden bite. It's not easy to see, but she shows Kenny, so Kenny knows, and they got to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to handle that. As far as Duck's concerned, at this point, he's still kind of in shock a little bit. He doesn't understand what's happening. He doesn't really know that his mom's been bit. Kenny starts to wonder how he's going to deal with telling Duck about that and how that works. And then by the end of the episode, Katja has passed away. They have had to shoot her before they leave the pharmacy and escape the zombie horde that's coming in. So we get on to episode 2 with Duck. And episode 2, 3, 4, basically season 1 with Duck, he doesn't make it in the game past episode 3, the middle of episode 3 or so. In this version, he makes it to the farm with Kenny. Katja's obviously not there, so Kenny's extra protective of Duck. He's trying to keep a close eye on him. But Duck is still playing on the swing, and he's still being a kid. He still goes ham for the meat on the table at dinner time. You know, most of that plays up pretty similar. And then Kenny has to kill off Larry. We're going to say, I had a couple of different possibilities there, but we're going to say that for the sake of this, that Kenny does kill off Larry. Lily's not happy with him. Duck starts to question, hey, what happened in there? What's going on? Kenny obviously doesn't want to talk about it right now. So we kind of move forward a little bit in time. We get through episode 3. We get through the train. We get all the way to Savannah. Duck is still there. He didn't get bit. When they escaped the motel, he was right there beside Kenny. They got into the RV. He was safe and sound. So he gets off. He gets to the train. Gets on the train. Kenny's still upset. You know, he lost Katja. But at this point in the series, that's been a couple of months. Had to remember there. So at this point in the series, it's been about 3 months since Katja passed away at the end of episode 1, right? So we still have that 3-month time jump with their hungry and that kind of stuff. So it's been about 3 months. Kenny's kind of started to not move past, because you never really move past, but he's found a way to start handling it and dealing with it. He's talked to Lee, opened up a little bit more. Him and Lee have gotten a little closer. The whole thing with Lily and getting kicked off the RV, we'll talk about that when we get to Kenny and Lily's story. Lily's not there, though, either way. They get to Savannah. They go through all kinds of craziness. The normal stuff that you see, but except the Duck's there this time. Duck and Clementine are together. They both get taken by the stranger, because the stranger has decided, well, I had a son and a daughter. Now I've got a son and a daughter back, right? In the meantime, Kenny will, no matter what you do with Ben, and we'll talk about that when we actually talk about Ben and whenever we get to that. But Ben can either die falling off the bell tower, or he can survive, and they all make it over that jump, going to try and rescue Clementine and Duck in this instance. So they all make it over the alleyway safely. They get to the roof where Lee is standing there. Kenny walks up, accidentally bumps him. The walkie falls into the hole. Ben, in this instance, decides to jump down and get it. Kenny has to jump down. It could be Ben or Krista. Kenny decides to jump down to save them and boost them out, and then he disappears, right? And he's telling Lee, like, hey, save my son. I'll try to get out and meet you. We'll find out in season 2 that Lee was able to save both Duck and Clementine in this scenario. And Kenny, who we're playing as in season 2 in my rewrite, for the first episode is kind of figuring things out. He's getting out of Savannah, but it takes him longer than he thought to get out of Savannah. So he doesn't meet back up with anybody. He doesn't know. For all he knows, Duck and Clementine and Lee and everybody are dead. He has no way of knowing. He goes back out of town, back by the train. He figures that's where they would have gone to, but he doesn't see them there. So he goes off on his own. He winds up meeting Sarita, winds up getting all the way to the ski lodge, right? And once he gets to the ski lodge, that's where Clementine and Duck and Krista and Omid and the whole gang shows up, right? Ben's there. A whole group shows up, as well as the cabin group. Now, before the cabin group gets there, at this point, we've got Kenny, we've got Duck, who's a little bit older, and Duck he's a little bit more grown up, right? By that point, it's been almost 2 years that in the game, and we'll keep that time gap there. So that we'll have a time where Krista has gone through whatever happened with her baby, and things are kind of, they've had to figure some things out. And Duck has grown up. Duck and Ben both have grown up quite a bit. So Duck, when they first see Kenny, Duck, he doesn't know what to think. He's like, oh my God, that's my dad. So instead of Clementine running over and hugging Kenny, it's Duck and Clementine, but Duck first. He's excited. He's glad to see Kenny. Once they get inside the lodge and they start to kind of chat and they start to catch up, and that's when some of the memories start coming back, and Duck starts saying, I don't know what happened. Kristen Omid said something about, or Clementine said something about you killed Larry, and so I've been working through processing that. And that's where Kenny has to have the conversation with Duck about what happened in the meat locker. And he has to justify what he did, why he did it, and basically saying, I wanted to get back to you. I was trying to save you. That's what I was going for. And that would be a very emotional, big conversation that I think would be an interesting one to see between the two of them and how that dynamic would play out, especially with Duck kind of getting a little bit more mature. Over that almost 2-year stretch, he's gone from this little run around happy-go-lucky dude to a little bit more serious, a little bit more, he's done some gun training now. He's kind of, he's starting to age, him and Clementine have gotten to be pretty good friends. So throughout season 2, as we get into Carver's camp, because we still go to House Hardware, we still deal with Carver. Where I would tweak things in the writing is that Carver would last all the way through to the end. Carver would be the big bad guy that has to be dealt with in season 2. A little bit more nuanced. And I would almost have a difference between how Clementine and Duck see Carver, because Duck is siding with his dad. Kenny doesn't like Carver. Kenny is going, we are playing as Kenny in this scenario. And so we are like wary of what's this guy up to. Duck wants to kind of side with us, but he's kind of torn between Clementine is talking about how Carver seems to be making some sense about some things. Kenny's trying to convince her, but Duck is kind of stuck in the middle there. And it'd be interesting to see how he would react. And I would say, based off of how Lee and Kenny's relationship was, that could add a little interesting dynamic in, because if they were close, and he knows that Lee was close with Clementine, Duck might side more with Kenny and try to tell Clementine, like, hey, look, you need to listen to my dad. But if they were more distant and Clementine spent all this time with Duck, Duck might be more hesitant to follow what Kenny has to say. And he might be more he might be more kind of leaning towards what Clementine is talking about and what Carver's saying. So that could be kind of an interesting dynamic. And then get to the end of the season, and it's a choice between Kenny and Carver are fighting it out and trying to convince Clementine specifically and Duck to kind of figure out who they're going to go with. And based off of how you talk to Clementine, based off of how you talk to Duck and how you acted as Kenny throughout the season, Clementine could wind up deciding that she likes what Carver's got to say. And that's the end of Kenny at that point. You as the playable character would die at the end of that season, just like you did as Lee. But if things had gone well, if you had been able to convince them, if you had been, if Lee and Kenny had been close friends in the first season, Kenny could live. Carver gets killed. Now you have Kenny walking out. And I would say there'd be choices along the way that you could still possibly have Krista Omid, Ben, and you could even have Sarah. I would keep Sarah alive, but Duck specifically, whether his dad gets killed off depends on whether he sides with him or not. And that could be another instance where Duck could almost wind up getting killed himself by Clementine, by her actions. Carver decides to take out Kenny, Duck steps in, Carver takes out Duck too, because they were, Duck didn't go with Clementine. So you could lose them both. In this scenario, we're going to keep Duck alive. We're going to keep him moving forward with Kenny. We'll let him keep Kenny around, because it could make for far more interesting conversations in seasons 3 and 4. Season 3 would be the school. They get to the Erickson's boarding school. They meet the kids there. The teacher could even still be alive. I don't know how long the teacher lived after after everything went down. But you wind up showing up there, and you got this group of kids that's holding the school down. They're trying to build up their own thing. You potentially have a couple of new adults coming along with Kenny and Krista Omid. Ben at this point is basically an adult. He's grown up a lot of the time that he's come along. So you've got potentially a good sized group that's shown up at Erickson's, and Duck fits in really well. But I think it would be interesting because in season 3 and 4, I would have you're playing as Clementine. And at this point, it could be interesting. You add a little bit of whether it's a love triangle or just like a social triangle in there with Duck and maybe one of the kids at the school that he kind of becomes good friends with, or starts a relationship with, kind of like Clementine with either Violet or Lewis. Like, so you have this little thing now because they've started to kind of they found this community and it seems pretty settled. Everything seems fine. But we'll have little things go along throughout the season, with ultimately the end of the season being Clementine gets abducted by the New Frontier. And I would have probably the last episode, episode 5 would be Clementine gets abducted by the New Frontier. You get some intro to the New Frontier before getting into season 4, which would be the final season in this scenario as well, where Clementine would then have to come into her own, figure out how to get away from the New Frontier. They've got a fight with the Delta going on. The politics and the drama gets interesting this whole time. Duck is still kind of like forming his own little group there, and he's becoming a man. And this is where Kenny, if he's still around, is watching his son grow up, and I think the dynamic between Duck saying, hey, I've become big, I've become stronger, I've become a warrior, I want to help the school out. Kenny would be a little bit torn. He doesn't want to see anything happen to Duck, but on the other hand, he would be really proud to see Duck at this point, let's say we're another couple years in, so maybe Duck is in his mid-teens, right? And he's really growing up, and so Kenny's watching this happen before his eyes, and I would have maybe a sign, there's something in there, a line from Kenny like, your mom would be so proud of you, something like that. The final season would even be, I think, interesting to have that Duck Clementine dynamic and have them almost going against each other, but also like not really, because because they've been good friends this whole time. So it could be kind of cool to have them maybe as adversaries a little bit. Maybe Clementine has gotten into the New Frontier and they've explained to her why the Delta's bad. And maybe the Delta has shown up and they aren't quite as bad to the Erickson's kids. Maybe they're not trying to kidnap them, right? Maybe the Delta, they're still fighting their war, but maybe they're trying to recruit them instead. So they're trying to convince them and they're making some good arguments. And then Clementine shows back up from the New Frontier and says, hey, these guys are terrible. They do awful things. Duck's been kind of listening to them this whole time and saying, well, no, they've actually been good to us. They brought us food. They've been helping us out. It could be a fun little back and forth to have with them. I think that would be, and then the end of the season could culminate with Clementine, depending on the goodwill over the four seasons and how things have gone, either convincing Duck and either going back over and helping Erickson's to defeat the New Frontier or to fend off the Delta, or having some kind of fight between them, or even Duck coming over to her side. Like there's so many ways that this could end. You could have a war. You could have maybe just like a diplomatic solution to it if you do things just right. I'm drawing some inspiration from Detroit Become Human here in a little way, because at the end of Detroit, you can kind of settle things pretty peacefully. You lose some people along the way. That's what happens. But you can kind of settle things peacefully, or you can go all out crazy. And I think that could be a lot of fun to see at the end of the series. And then after 4 seasons, you've got potentially Duck and Clementine have grown up together. Kenny might still be there. Seeing his son becoming a man, like that would be such a big moment, I think, for the very end of it. Maybe Duck would have to make some kind of final decision. And based on how he made that decision, based on prior stuff that had happened, Kenny could either be like, I'm really proud of you, I love you, son, or I can't believe this, I can't believe you've done this. Like, he could betray Kenny, he could turn into a complete bad guy. That would be interesting to see Duck become a complete bad guy based on your decisions that you made. But I think with that, my throat's been hurting lately. It's seasonal changes and that kind of thing. And I've got to rest it up a little bit before I've got stream in a couple of hours. I'm filming this on a Saturday, which I normally don't do. But my wife is at work. Her schedule changed this week. So my schedule changed because her schedule changed. So I'm filming this on about 4 hours before I start streaming. So if you watched the stream last Saturday, hopefully that went well. My internet's been up and down today, so hopefully it went really well. I'm going to go ahead and plug my book again because I plugged this last week. I don't talk about my writing very much. I've got GPS Signal Lost. I've got 3 total books. I've got the journal, GPS Signal Lost, and then a book called Legends and Tales, which is it's a conglomeration of spooky stories. They're all written by me. I stay away from AI stuff. I've written them. These are years ago that I wrote these. So if you want to check those out, all the links will be in the description below. You can go over on Amazon. I've got some copies on my website. I'll sign and mail out copies on there. My inventory is kind of low at the moment. So if demand starts to go up on that, if you guys want signed copies of my books, I'll get inventory in and then I can start doing that again. But I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this one here. I didn't really have anything else to talk about, but if you like the video, if you want to see other characters, make sure you let me know down in the comments what characters you want to see so I can prioritize talking about them in this particular series. And then I'm also going to be doing other games, other characters at some point. Just right now, The Walking Dead's really big on the channel, and so I'm going to stick to some of the Walking Dead stuff for this because honestly, we went through the Philosophy and Ethics series. I'm running out of characters to cover in Friend or Foe, interesting enough characters to cover in Friend or Foe. So this is my next outlet to kind of talk about how I would rewrite things as an author. So that's all I got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.